All ready to go?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to session 2 of our 4-part strategic planning webinar series. Today's focus will be the life cycle of the nonprofits. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to recognize our sponsors. You see here on the screen, the Lawrence County Board of Commissioners, Penn Power, UPMC, the Elwood Group, Neshannock Township, Bruce and Marilees, Hickory Run Energy, Huntington Bank, Packard Thomas, and Arnett Carvis Toothman, Central Heating and Plumbing, Columbia Gas of Pennsylvania, First Commonwealth Bank, LCAP, and Westminster College. All of these generous sponsors partnered with our Leadership Lawrence County Alumni Association to bring you our webinar series today. So without further ado, I'd like to thank them all one more time. And I will now hand off to our instructors from the University of Georgia, J.W. Fanning Institute of Leadership and Development, the incomparable training duo of Terrence Johnson and Julie Meehan.
Good morning, y'all.
Good morning, everyone. And we have another part. We brought some backup for you all today in Sage Medlin, and we'll have her introduce herself in just a second here. But just at a quick glance before Sage has a chance to introduce herself, with each series, we're going to go ahead and leave this slide up because this slide is just so important to just lean into. When you think about a growing community and you think about a dying community, and just kind of like at a high level view, when you look at what we're going to be talking about today with the life cycle of nonprofits and, just touching on some strategies around strategic planning. We're going to touch a willingness to accept risk and plan growth and things of that sort. And also really look forward to our next session, which will hit some of these areas as well when we talk about ethics and just the different committees that are a part of a board and how they're best used. So again, welcome to the Nonprofit Board Training 102. And I'm Terrence Johnson. Julie?
I'm Julie Meehan. I've been at the Fanning Institute and met many of you for several years now, and am excited to be back in front of you. We're going to break up our session today, so I'm going to bring up the tail end and look forward to making that worth hanging around for.
Thank you so much. And Sage, if you could introduce yourself to our wonderful group this morning.
Sure. Good morning. My name is Sage Medlin. I'm from the Fanning Institute as well. I've been here about 6 years, and my career has been dedicated to working with nonprofit organizations, primarily focused in Georgia. I'm a lifelong Georgian, if you can't tell by the accent. My passion is really helping nonprofits that want to make a difference in their communities. So primarily, most of my work has been in Georgia and around the Southeast. It's good to be with you all today.
Thanks, Sage. And so you all, again, this is our second session. Today's focus is going to be on the life cycle of nonprofit boards, and we are going to take a look at some different strategies when you're developing your strategic plans. And also we'll give you some good information about creating those strategic priorities. So we look forward to our time together today. And trust me, we are fully aware that we have not gone around and have done introductions. And we listen to your feedback, and that does take up a lot of time, but it pains us not to get to hear you say good morning and your name again and all the other good stuff. So just know that that's on our minds. And good morning and good to see you all. And Sage, we're going to go ahead and hand it to you.
All right. So one of the things that we rely really heavily on when we work with nonprofits here at the Fanning Institute is something called the nonprofit life cycle. And the idea is that nonprofit organizations go through developmental stages, similarly to the way that, individuals or people do, and even in businesses. And you can go to the next slide, Terrence. And this is the visual manifestation of this life cycle. that we work with. And I want to say a couple of things about it before we go into each of the stages. The idea of any model, is that you take this concept or this idea and you boil it down into really easy to understand and visualize concepts. So this model looks a little bit like a circle, right? But in reality, what we know about the nonprofit life cycle is that nonprofits can go through into any stage at any time. They can go back and forth. It's not a particularly necessarily circular process. I'd like for you to keep that in mind as we move forward today. There's a couple of other things to keep in mind. Is that the age of your nonprofit doesn't have anything really to do with the stage that you're in. You can have been around for 40 years and you could be firmly established in the community, go through a period of stagnancy, and then swoop back up into startup mode. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means in a second. And you could be a brand new organization and really be moving along so quickly that you're in this mature stage within a matter of 3 to 5 years. So it really doesn't have anything to do with age. Let's see, what else do I want you to keep in mind? That you can be in one area of your nonprofit, let's say board governance, you can be in one stage of the life cycle, while in another area, let's say evaluation, you could be in a different phase of the life cycle. For example, I worked with a museum that when they first started, they got a bunch of money to do programming with, to do exhibits with, right? So in 5 years after their birth, for lack of a better word, in 5 years, they were excellent in programming. They were really mature in their programming because they had the money to do it. What they were really sort of still in startup phase around was fundraising and resource development. Makes sense, right? Because they didn't have to focus on that for the first 5 years of their life. So once that 5-year money was gone, they had to really focus on developing that part of their organization. So you can be in different places at different times. So let me tell you how these sort of things start up. In your nonprofit organizations, typically somebody has an idea of a service or service that is needed in community. And typically that need is personal. It's born out of a personal experience. So for example, if I'm the mother of a young child with disabilities and I see that I need advocacy support and help, right, that I can't find that in my community, then I may start an ombudsman program for parents with children with disabilities. Again, I have an idea that's born out of a need that I have some sort of personal connection to. And that's really the idea phase. And we often call that the kitchen table phase, because what happens is I say, I've got this idea, and I start calling people who might also have the same passion, or who have passion for me, who care about me, who are interested in this. And I bring them to the kitchen table and we start a nonprofit organization. That startup phase is usually when your 501c3 or C6 or whatever it is starts, when you really begin to put the things that are required for legal determination of nonprofit status together, your board, some bylaws, things like that. And then in that startup phase, you begin to deliver services. And most of the people who are providing those services in startup organizations are either volunteer, they're board members. It's maybe one person you're figuring out how to pay, but usually it's made up of a small group of people who, again, have that passion. That passion is driving them and providing energy for them to provide services. And when an organization then becomes good at providing services, the demand begins to exceed the capability, and that's when adolescence starts. I always tell this story because I can't think of adolescence a different way. My son just turned 20, but before that, we had 3 teenagers in the house, right? And I can remember when my son turned 13, and he grew from, about my height to 6'2". It seemed like overnight, right? He was this big, kind of smelly, loud, guy all of a sudden, young man all of a sudden. And I was behind the 8 ball. I wasn't ready for that. I didn't really know how to relate to him. Adolescent organizations are really different. And we didn't have some of the things that we needed in our household for a teenage boy. I didn't have the learning. I didn't have the structure in place. He needed a bigger bed, all these things. Adolescent organizations are much the same. The demand for services grows beyond the capacity of what the organization can provide. And there's some growing pains there. Organizations then begin to put in infrastructure and support systems that will really help support that growth and sustain that growth, and then move into maturity. Organizations in mature stage can begin to think of things like endowments, sustainability plans. They typically have boards that are making policy level decisions. No longer like in the startup, every board member is rolling up their sleeves to get in the game, right? Everybody's walking the walk. Everybody's doing anything that needs to be done to get an organization going. In mature stage, the board is really just at that policy level. And then we know when we get comfortable, right? I'm reaching 50. I can feel a little bit of this. When we get comfortable, we begin to stagnate sometimes, right? We forget what it's like. Maybe we lose a little bit of that passion. We begin to say, what are we doing here? And organizations, again, go through that same stage. They can go through that same stage. In order to keep organizations alive, as you reach stagnancy, you really have to figure out how to swing back around that curve and get to the younger parts of the life cycle again. So an organization that's been running the same program in the same community for 30 years, that's been doing okay, but maybe the funders are starting to go somewhere else. Maybe the board members are not showing up anymore. Nobody's engaged. Really needs to do something like innovate or renew or even shed some existing programs in order to move back around that life cycle. So before we move into looking a little bit closer at each step, I just want to ask, are there any questions about this? Does it ring true, or are you feeling like maybe it's a bunch of hooey? Anybody? Okay, let's move on and we'll talk about each of the stages, and we'll talk about the importance of the life cycle and planning. So again, we talked about that idea in startup, and you can go again, Terrence. The idea of startup is really characterized by passion. The beautiful thing is that passion is exciting. There's lots of energy. And then the downside to passion is that it can only take you so far, right? You can really burn out easily in this stage. Again, this idea, the need is identified, services begin to be delivered. Evaluation usually tends to be like, oh, well, we served 50 people. We're beginning to identify people who will help us with resources and money. And our board members are usually friends. A great example of this is an organization I work with whose mom, it's a woman whose daughter was a heroin addict, and she had moved across the country, and her mother couldn't help her anymore. There wasn't much she could do for her on a day-to-day basis. So but she knew what young women who are heroin addicts needed. And she started this program to help people getting out of jail or getting out of treatment get back on their feet. And she was one person with an idea, and she called her friends around. And this whole organization really began to be supported by her Sunday school class. They were the ones helping her on a day-to-day basis. They were the ones providing dollars. The church took them in and helped them get their 501c3. So again, lots of passion, good ideas, services being delivered, lots of friends. Okay, Terrence, you can double click. Okay. Again, adolescence, growth, and that feeling of uncertainty. So that Excel spreadsheet and that checking account that you're using as a startup organization to keep the books, probably not going to do it anymore for an adolescent organization. QuickBooks may need to learn new skills, get new systems in place. Staff may be hired. And a director begins to distinguish activities from what the board does, right? In startup organizations, board's doing everything. In an adolescent organization, the board is beginning to shift into more of a governance and letting the director make some day-to-day decisions. This can be difficult for organizations to do. Adolescence is painful because if I'm really passionate about an idea, I'm probably going to be really creative around it. And when an adolescent organization starts to grow, they need somebody who is less vision and creativity and more systems and structures. And so I'm really bought in this organization, but I may not be the right person to help it move to maturity. And that there are going to be some growing pains there. Also, board members who have been really hands-on in the startup phase may have some trouble moving to more of a governance board in adolescence. All right, Terrence. And again, mature organizations, there's more delegation. That line between director and board is solid. There's hierarchy usually comes into place. You begin to understand again that with those systems in place that you've set in the adolescent stage, we need more organization. You begin to make hires not just by who's available and who's passionate, but who has the skills that the organization needs to move forward. And then you're thinking about things like professional development, sustainability plans. How do we get the right people and how do we keep the right people? And mature organizations are doing evaluation, not just to count the number of people who they serve, but to identify the impact that those services are making. Mature organizations also have a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? A little bit more opportunity. They can take more opportunity for collaborations and more effective and efficient partnerships because they're no longer living in that day-to-day putting out the fires situation that adolescence is sometimes characterized by. And then stagnant, it's characterized by complacency. And really, you can identify a stagnant organization when morale is pretty low. I mentioned a lot of board turnover, or board members maybe coming, not asking any questions, or maybe not coming at all, or when they're there, just not really participating. You may see a decrease in the demand for services or that mission creep, right? We're just trying to get the money to keep us alive. So we're doing services maybe that are outside of our mission. And then stagnant organizations tend not to have their finger on the pulse of the community anymore. You know, at one time, in order to have an idea to fill a gap in the community, you got to know what the community needs, right? In order to grow, you got to really know which direction your community is going to support you. Maturity and complacency is begin to sort of get that finger off the pulse of the community, and sometimes stagnant organizations really lose touch with their community. All right, Terrence. All right, so let's talk about strategic planning. How do you think this life cycle might be helpful when you're thinking about planning for an organization?
I think you have to account for, it's good to know the stages, because if you're putting a plan together, hopefully you have a 1 year, 5 year, 10-year plan. So you can think of these stages. And when you start a startup, you might think, what does maturity look like? Or what resources might we need in funding to get past the day-to-day fires to continue to succeed as an organization?
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great point. So it's good to know sort of where you are, where you want to go, and what's needed in order to get there so you can plan for it. Anybody else? I think that, you know, one of the things that I think about with strategic planning and organizations, and I'll tell you guys a story of actually it was the same organization with the mom that started this to help young women who are addicts. They called me to do strategic planning. And so we started doing strategic planning. We didn't really talk about the life cycle. We just jumped into strategic planning. And they had all these ideas, their board, a small board of 6 or 7 people, and the founder of this organization. She didn't have any other staff. She had been running this organization for about 20 years. She was in her 70s. And we were doing strategic planning, and there were all these ideas about how they were going to grow. how they were going to get more volunteers, how they were going to utilize volunteers, different services they wanted to provide the women that they served, different huge fundraisers they were going to put on. And it began to dawn on me that as they were talking and planning for all this growth, the director was just slumping down in her chair, just looking more and more exhausted. And so we started talking, and I said, well, who's going to do this work? And she said, I'm ready to retire. And I don't see anybody around who's going to pick up and do this work. So at that point, our strategic planning our process really changed, because what we started doing was helping an organization think about how they're going to move from startup. She's been around 20 years, but she was still in that startup phase. We started planning, thinking about how we were going to help an organization grow into and out of adolescence to maturity. That's what the conversation was. But in reality, what we needed to be talking about was how to help this startup organization stay just where they were and figure out how long they were going to be able to do that, and how they were going to give this woman the graceful exit that she wanted, and just make difficult decisions about whether or not that organization was going to live on after she retired. So another thing that's really important to think about this life cycle is that that mature phase is not necessarily the holy grail. In other words, it's not something that every organization needs to reach for. The way that you decide whether or not you're in the right stage for your organization is whether or not you're able to effectively meet your mission or serve your mission, right? If I'm a startup organization or an adolescent organization, let's say I'm between startup and adolescence, and my spreadsheet, again, I keep going back to this because I was on a board where we ineffectively used a spreadsheet to keep up with our checking account, our cash balance. If that's what we're doing and we're not able to serve our mission, and one of the things that's holding us back is that we don't have sophisticated enough accounting system, it's time to do something different. Right? If we can't grow our services to meet our need to serve our mission because we don't have what's in place, we need to move to that adolescent, to that mature situation. If everything's working for us and we're rocking and rolling and we're able to meet our mission, we may be just where we need to be, right? Any other thoughts? Well, thank you, Terrence. Any other thoughts about strategic planning in the life cycle?
Yeah, if I could throw a couple out as you were talking, if you could leave that slide up. A few things come to mind. So when you bring up that stagnant, one thing that goes on in my mind is combating wagon wheel makers. And you may not understand that analogy, but I'm sure the last guy or gal who made wagon wheels was fantastic at it. There's just not much call for wagon wheel makers. I always say thank goodness for people like Jonas Salk, Thomas Alva Edison, Henry Ford, all those people who didn't say this is the way we've always done it. And having said that, I think that in dealing with this nonprofit, there are so many moving parts, and I'm referencing trying to deal with multiple small municipalities who may have may be run by wagon wheel makers. And then on the other hand, I think there are some great eager people, and I guess I'm going to get into the ideal or the startup where, okay, we all agree on what you want to get done, but the plan has to have the ability to be accomplished. I think sometimes there might be a means to an end that you're designing a plan to fail. Yeah, on paper, it's going to get us there, but in practicality, you're not addressing the realities in front of you, and you can't ignore the realities in front of you. So those are just a couple of my ideas here relative to that. And I don't want to sound like Henny Penny, the sky's falling, but I'm just framing your training into what I think we need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a couple of really great points. One is that wagon wheel makers have their place, right? we need wagon wheel makers, but stagnant organizations may not necessarily be the best place for wagon wheel makers, right? In a stagnant organization, an organization that can say, we need to innovate. Do we have the right people here to really do innovation, right? And those are the kinds of difficult conversations that you have to be strategic about having in your strategic planning process. It's not just about reaching priorities. It's not just about identifying tactics. It's not just about measurements. It's also about the opportunity to ask and answer these tough questions about, do you have the right people? Where are you? Do the people that are in place have the right competencies that you need for that particular cycle? Do they have the right competencies to deal with, to be an innovator in a wagon wheel world? That's a specific skill, right? Not everybody can do it. So great points. Thank you. Anybody else? So we're going to give you, and I'm going to try to do it right now in the chat. If it doesn't work, we'll make sure that we get you this an email. What I'm going to hand you right now, yeah, and it's telling me it's, oh, maybe. No. We'll have to email it to you. One of the things, Terrence, can I share my screen really quickly so I can show it? One of the things we have for you is an assessment that can help you identify where you are on the life cycle. And I think I'll be able to show it to you in just a second. Terrence, you might have to stop sharing. Okay, there we go. All right, can y'all see that document with the different colors? Okay, great. So this is the assessment that we'll send to you. And really how it works is across the horizontal line here, you have all these things relate to a board. And what you do is you read these different characteristics and activities and you check the ones that seem most in line with your organization. And what will probably happen, so you read each startup, check the ones here, read Adolescence, check the ones here. What will happen is that you'll probably have checks all across this line, and that's okay. But what you want to see is where the majority of them are. So you do this for your board, CEO and staff, your programs and services, operations and finance. And you'll notice that we have that different from resource development. Some organizations, when they start, have a person who does all this at the same time, but what we really want to separate out how you develop resources from how you track and account for those resources. And then you'll notice here that these are competencies. So again, you need different strategies at each point in the life cycle. And in order to enable those strategies, people need different competencies across that. So we'll make sure that you get that. Oh, Christina, thank you. So you should have it in your chat. You should be able to just download that. And if there are no other questions about the life cycle, that's all me, Terrence.
Sage, thank you so much. That was awesome. We really appreciate that. And I got to tell you all, when I think about what Sage just shared with you, the Fanning Institute has so many different tools that we put out there. And the tool that she just shared with you is in my top 5 for sure. Wherever I train and do strategic planning for, whenever I do it for an organization, I make sure that they have copies of that sheet. I just did it Friday of last week, and I said, you all keep these sheets, make copies of them, because using that checklist, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 6 months from now, it's just such a wonderful checklist. So make sure you make copies of that and keep that handy. So I will keep things rolling, and I gotta say, when we look at where we are and the things that we're talking about here today, we're kind of focused right into the critical issues, opportunities, goals, and strategies. And Julie will tap into accountability measures and just give you a couple of tips on how to operationalize a plan. But again, this is at a real high level, and it's supposed to be that way in these bursts that we're giving you. But first and foremost, I got to say, Leonard, as they say, get your hands out my pocket, man. I love analogies. And this morning I said, how can I make this like super clear? And I thought about the wagon wheel. So Leonard, man, what's up? So
we're simpatico, bro. I don't know what to tell you.
I love it. All right. So you all, when you think about strategic planning, and strategic planning in its purest form focuses attention on organizational priorities and growth and sustainability. As you all know, it critically examines strengths as well as challenges. It allows a team to verbalize agreements and disagreements. And it helps organizations to prepare for the future by documenting the goals, the strategies, resources, and things of that sort. And it provides context for decision making. With all that being said, people always want to create the wagon wheel all over again. And I'm going to tell you, there's a wheel that works really, really good for this that all of you have heard of. I'm sure SWOT, strengths, weaknesses. It's so funny on my paper here, I have an A written. I did this like 2:30 or 3 in the morning when I kind of went over opportunities and threats. And so we're going to talk about a SWOT here, but I just want to really go back to that wagon wheel. Because when you think about a SWOT, many people say, we've done SWOTs, we've done this and that. And I think about that wooden wagon wheel and how folks took off with that wagon wheel. They're like, yeah, this is pretty cool, we're rolling. But folks made that wagon wheel better by adding a belt around it, by adding shocks, by changing the actual rim after years and changing the actual tires and doing different things to make that ride a lot smoother. But it's still a wagon wheel. It's still a SWOT when you're all said and done. It just looks different and it feels different. So with all that being said, I have to be clear that all SWOTs are not created the same. So when I talk about SWOTs, I'm going to go from just, an experience here in real time. I mean, just 48 hours ago, I'm standing before a group, and this is what we did. So we had a conversation about a SWOT. And of course, you see people's eyes just kind of go like, oh, here we go again. But this is not a here we go againer. When we do SWOTs at the JW Fanning Institute, this is what we do, is we break groups. Let's say the group size is 20. We'll break you up into 5 different groups. Each group gets their own color marker. And this is something I do want you to try at home. Each group gets their own color marker, and you put 4 flip charts and, spaced out really far in the room if you have a big enough room. And you give each group a chance to answer questions, one in the box for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, I threw some questions in here, but depending on your organization, you may want to ask different questions. You may have some issues around diversity or what have you. You may want to throw some different questions in here. But what I want to do is just at a high level, just pull out a couple of these questions and just talk to you about them. So when you're looking at strengths and you think about, that last one there, what makes you most proud about your association with the organization? So you think about a board member, this is their opportunity to boast and brag. When I signed up for this organization, this is what I was so excited about. It gets you back to what Sage was talking about, that idea I was on fire for. I mean, so what are the strengths and how do people see us within this organization? What do they say we're doing well? What do they say we need to continue doing? And even folks from outside the organization, what are they saying? What are they saying about our internal strengths? When you look at weaknesses, what could be improved? I mean, where does the organization have fewer resources than others? And this is, I want to use that word boast again. I like asking an organization, what weaknesses can you boast about? You're in a room with board members. You all know where the bodies are buried. Boast about those things. Talk about them. Bring them to the surface. Because if you bring those things to the surface, then you can deal with them. So just straight brag about areas that you're not doing well in. Sounds different, but when you word it that way, it opens folks up to be really clear about the weaknesses, and that transparency helps in the overall planning process. And opportunities, you want to make sure that you're looking at your strengths, things that you're doing extremely well, And how can you take those strengths that are within the ranks of the staff, on the board, potential board members, maybe you have a committee that meets outside of the board. How can you take those strengths and turn those into even more opportunities to complement your mission? And so when I think about the threats and you know what we just did this past week is, again, just like in weaknesses, take a real honest look at those threats. As Sage talked about, if you know that you have shady bookkeeping and things are just not the way that it needs to be, not that you're doing anything wrong intentionally, but it's just not right. It's just, it leaves a lot to be desired. Then talk about those things. Hopefully you've developed enough trust with your board so you can have those honest conversations. So when you hold that mission statement up, it's kind of like an X-ray. You got to ask yourself, have we fallen short of our stated mission? And be honest about that. Have we started to experience mission drift? And be honest about that. Now, as I said, all SWATs are not created the same. So as I told you in the beginning, folks have their red markers, blue markers, green markers, brown markers, just depending on which board they started at. So we have a technique that we use at the Institute called rotating flip charts. So each group had 10 minutes to write on the strengths box, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. At 10 minutes, I gave them the cue to go clockwise to the next section. And we did that a total of 4 times. Now you can imagine by the time we got to the 4th rotation, we had at least, I would say, 3 to 4 flip charts on each section completely like full, which was really, really, really good to see. And so for that last one, instead of going, I told them, I said, you all will look at 7 or 8 minutes, just depending on when you all stop writing. Because by the time we got to the 4th round, I mean, they had really, really come up with a ton of good stuff. So they did not need the full 10 minutes. But like I said, the rotating flip chart is an excellent activity. And now I'm going to tell you all, this wagon wheel here, don't throw it out. And it's best used when you sandwich it in between your visioning, mission, and values work. You talk about that stuff first, because what it does is that's at such a creative high level, is so conceptual. When you're talking about those things, it really sparks the energy and the discussion when you get into these 4 boxes here. And then the other slice of bread there would be what Julie's going to talk to you about next, and that is developing the strategic priorities. And so this information that you generate, so like I told you, we're talking about a total of 12 sheets of good information that help to generate the specificity needed to break down the strategic priorities. So a SWOT used the right way in a creative way can pull out some really good information. Do you have any questions on what I just shared? Anyone? Okay. All right. So I'm going to hand it off to my good friend, Julie.
Okay. So I can't overstate the importance of having a SWOT enough. So that makes you look at every piece of your organization, what you're doing well, internally and externally, what your weaknesses and threats are, both internally and externally. And that gives you kind of the world that you can choose from to identify what are the critical issues facing your organization. And the critical issues facing your organization are really going to help you develop what are your strategic priorities moving forward. So after we have our groups work on, you can go ahead back one, T. After we have our groups work on the SWOT, we have them usually just kind of taking in all of that information from the SWOT and understanding all of the different pieces of information that came out of that SWOT. Sit down and just kind of write and reflect and think about what are the key things that keep coming to mind, or the themes that are brought out by that SWOT. And so we have them write that on a half-page sticky sheet and stick all those sticky sheets up on the wall to see across tables what are the themes that came out over the SWOT that kind of now represent what are the key strategies that we're going to need to take on. So go ahead and forward. So this is when we create the plan itself. The plan itself will take those critical priorities, key strategies, I think we call them. And you'll notice in strategic planning, you get caught up in words a lot, strategies versus goals versus high-level actions versus indicators. So this is the way we kind of break ours down. The goal is going to be the what. It's going to say, here's the theme that we came up with, and here's what we want to do about that theme. The strategy is the how. So how are we going to accomplish the goal that we've set around that theme? And then we'll have high-level actions, which are the tasks, and key performance indicators, which is how we know we're making a dent in those tasks. And then an implementation target is an easy one. That's just a timeline for you. If you want to go ahead forward, T. So we use a worksheet that's something like this. The strategic priority is that theme area, right? So I'll show you an example in just a second. The goal is going to get at how to affect that strategic priority, and the strategies, there's going to be probably multiple strategies for each goal area. So those are going to be the how you get at the goal. And then the high level action will be what activities you take to meet those strategies. And the key performance indicators are how you know you've made progress. So let's give an example here. Oh, there's more. You have to, of course, operationalize the plan by putting in who's going to do what task, when it's going to be completed, and what resources are needed to complete that plan. So that's kind of the below the line in that inverted triangle. This is the operationalized level. So let's see an example. So this group, for example, had a strategic priority around human capital. They knew that they weren't using their resources to the best of their ability, both in staff members and board members. And so their goal, which came out of that theme, out of that strategic priority, was to develop the board and professional staff organizational capacity to support the school's mission. So that was what came out of that. So the goal is to develop the board and professional staff capacity to support the mission. The strategies, which are the how, right? These are the how you're going to accomplish those goals. Strategy 1 was to enhance the board to meet current and growth needs of the organization. And they were going to do that by maintaining a board matrix and identifying additional board structures to accommodate board needs. And then you can see here in the little tiny on the bottom is how they were going to make sure that they were able to keep those keep accountability to themselves and to the community by meeting those measures. So updating the board matrix, creating the board governance matrix. Each of them has a timeline, a goal, and that's how you know you're able to do that. There's another, I think, example after this of a I can't do the word this morning. I apologize. I'm just going to say it. Operationalized worksheet. So the strategic issue again was human capital. The goal was to increase employee satisfaction. This is a new goal to improve outcomes. The Strategy was to define clear expectations and goals for every employee department. And then we go into the action plan. So how is this all going to get done? And what do we need to accomplish? Who's going to be responsible for accomplishing all that? When is it due? And what are the accountability measures? So you can see how a large goal through a series of charts is taken down into a getting it done kind of level. And this is just another example, a strategic priority around sustainability, the goal being to ensure current and future financial sustainability of the organization. And then the strategy is to diversify funding. So you can see the breakdown of how that's going to happen and the accountability measures.
All right. Thank you so much, Julie. Any questions for Julie, you all? All right. So what we wanted to do here towards the end of our session is just cover some odds and ends that we just thought were important to discuss. So this study from a couple of years ago, and you know, we can can't take a super deep dive into it, but I just want to use some of this just to spark a little bit of a conversation for some of the time we have left. And so when you look at what's on the screen, you can definitely unmute yourselves and tell me what jumps out to you. I mean, the average board size has shrunk from 20 in 1994 to 15 members now. And who's been a part of a board that's had, I had one board as I was on, and you all are, you can feel my pain when I tell you this. All right, so there were 35 members of this board, and I was the only non-preacher on this board. So if you can imagine a board member with 34 preachers, can you imagine? I mean, so basically what I'm saying is like every question that was answered was a sermon. So we had all kind of issues with board meetings lasting too long, the whole 9 yards. But most boards are around 15 members now. Is that where you find yourselves? Just unmute yourself. Y'all, let's just have a conversation. Is that where you find yourselves now? Yay, nay?
I think too, the part of the reason that that's happened is that boards need to be a little bit more nimble.
Yes.
In their movement. And so having fewer members helps to make them able to move a little bit faster in this change.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to be able to pivot. How about you all? What sizes are your boards now? Boards that you are on or of your organization? Just throw out some numbers. Unmute yourselves.
20.
20, okay. What else? What other numbers?
15 on one, a little more than that on another.
Okay. Yeah. The one I just did the session for, they had 17. I'm on a couple that have 12, on a couple that have 20. I am presently not on any large boards. The 5 that I'm on have reasonable numbers, but like I said, I've been on those ridiculously large boards as well. They have on an average about 4.5 committees. We'll talk about committees more, I believe, the next time we meet. This last bullet I think is important before you join boards. It's a good one to be aware of. Any of you that are board chairs, you know that what it says here spends an average of 15 hours per month on the organization's business. That is, that's about right. And I'm a board chair on one, and it feels like it's more than 15 hours a month because it never leaves my mind because it feels like there's so much responsibility with that particular position. And I'm sure that some of you can relate to that.
Hey, Terrence, can I interrupt you real quick?
Absolutely.
That one of the things that slide makes me think about is when you're doing your SWOT analysis as part of strategic planning, these are things to talk about. In other words, if your board has 30 people in it, is that a strength?
Right.
Is that a weakness?
Yeah.
why? And these are things, how many committees do we have? Do they work do they work? Are they on paper only? They exist, but they never meet. So again, this is an opportunity for you to think about your board in terms of strategic planning. Is what's really working for you to serve the mission and what's not. And sometimes when we do SWOTs, we think in really general terms. We don't get into the nitty gritty around boards or programs or services or evaluation, but it can be helpful to have these types of conversations with and use some of this information to say, hey, this is what other nonprofits are doing. How do we look next to that?
Yeah. And Sage, thank you so much for that. And so you all, I don't want you writing. I see some of you all writing really fast. We're going to send you all of these all the slides. We promise we'll send you this. So you don't have to worry about writing it all down. But, as you can see, here's just a couple of more things. And I want to share one more slide. Does anybody want to discuss anything that you see up there in front of you?
I think one point, if you go back to term limits, I think if you have term limits, it needs to almost be meaningful or actually be a review of members. When you talk about life cycle, you can get into a stagnant organization because you're the same people on the same boards for 20, 25 years that maybe aren't effective any longer or aren't.
Yes.
The term limits you have sometimes aren't meaningful or they're not actually followed at all.
Craig, you said a mouthful there. One board that I'm on, we have a couple of members who've been a part of that board for 26 and 30 years, like 4 of them have. And that thought process is so hard to move along. I mean, it's tough, but some of you all have experienced this. When you're on a board and that organization is really booming and it's exciting and your term is up, I mean, you almost want to rewrite the bylaws, right? But it's healthy for you to have term limits and to roll on. Let me see, I want to get to another slide here. You guys did not jump up and down at this one. But you're going to get all these so you can dig in a little bit more. Okay, here we go. So when you talk about board chairs, like reporting that they find it difficult to find board members, and then you talk about diversity, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing just for a second. When you talk this is tough right now because one person shared in my last strategic planning session that she happens to be a white female that has an organization that serves 100% African American children, and it's a wonderful organization. I won't say the name or anything like that, but it's a wonderful organization, and it's for kids who've experienced homelessness. They don't have to pay a dime to come to this private school. I love the concept. Private school, they get great education. But she says that she learned from a local community foundation in this particular town that they would no longer get funding because they didn't check all the boxes for that particular line of funding. They checked the box with serving an underserved population. They did not check the box of having leadership that represented the population served, and they did not check the box that said that 51% of the board had to be minorities, not all Black, but just minorities. And you all, more and more agencies are experiencing this across the country. And we had such a robust conversation around that. And I'm just wondering, how does that grab you all? I mean, the whole diversity conversation, what are you dealing with on your boards, in your community? Is that even an issue?
Terrence, it certainly is an issue. Here, Lawrence County, there are a few people that we can all rely on who try to give their time, but it's the same minority people. And you have a really rough time finding somebody who's interested in your organization, who wants to participate, who has the time to participate. And I don't know how you strengthen that group of people who might be out there that you're trying to access that you don't know.
Yeah. Thank you, Linda. Other thoughts?
Linda, don't you think that Lawrence County is also somewhat hamstrung by our demographic? I mean, we haven't had any significant Latino population to speak of until, quite frankly, we had 150 families come as a result of the Puerto Rican hurricanes, but they're trying to get on their feet, and community needs to be served rather than one that can serve, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
They have limited resources. And, I forget what the demographic exactly is, but Lawrence County is like 95% Caucasian.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Go ahead, Linda.
That's true.
I'll put some things in the ether on that. So within First Energy, we have a focus on diversity and inclusion. So in Lawrence County, I pay particular attention to it. Puerto Rican families being one of them. Our structures aren't very inclusive within the county. So we've reached out and offered up many, many resources to try to help some of the Puerto Rican population get themselves on board. So last year we put Maria onto the leadership program as part of that. And then we kept on tapping into it. And I'm an engineer by trade and look at it. And the biggest barrier for them, we try to eliminate the barriers. Hey, come to the leadership program, do this, that, and that. They just aren't comfortable with it. Mm-hmm. And that to me is an inclusion mindset that our community, you're right, it's 95% Caucasian. It's actually more, it's 97. We're not very good at understanding how to make inclusive environments in different boards, because while that's the metric, it's not like they don't exist. Yeah. And it's not like we don't go down a county and we have much bigger minority populations that are actually part of the business environment here.
Yeah. John, excellent points, you all. And what I'm thinking is that in our final session, I think that we need to take a deeper dive into this conversation, because I think that it's healthy to have intentionality around making sure that your boards are diverse. So, you go back to that growing community and a dying community, you got to have different voices at the table. You just have to. It's just healthy. But Leonard, and your point is well taken, and it even went up 2% once John started talking as far as the ratios there, and that's tough. And I gotta end with this before I show you all the evaluation screen. This particular board I was working with had 3 Black females on it, and this female said something that I wish I could have just videotaped it. It was so powerful. She says that what folks are driving is tokenism by saying you gotta have X amount of minorities on a board. And her perspective is really interesting. She said you should be looking, we all know this, you should be looking for skills and abilities and gaps that you have on your board, versus the way she worded it was something to brown your pictures up. for your websites, for all this kind of stuff. She said you got to look for skills and abilities, and I just love the way that she worded it. And I probably butchered what she was saying, but I think you guys got the gist of it. So, but at any rate, I got to stop talking because we said we're going to stop in an hour, and I'm going to show you guys this last screen. If you have any questions while you're filling out your evaluations for Julie, Sage, or myself, just throw them out there and we can chat. Just unmute yourself, jump in at any time. Of course, the program is leadership. Actually, it's not. It's Lawrence County. This is just Lawrence County is the program, strategic planning. The date is today's date, and the facilitators are Sage Medlin, Terrence Johnson, and Julie Meehan. And guys, thank you for your time once again. This is always a blast. I wish we could be there in person with you. I see some lips moving, but I think you guys are on mute.
Thanks, y'all. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. I look forward to the next one.
Okay.